All right, strap yourselves in because today we are going deep on Elon Musk and his seriously ambitious plan to colonize Mars. We've been digging through a ton of Musk's statements and some in-depth analysis of what SpaceX has been up to. So whether you are prepping for that big meeting or maybe you are just a total space nerd like me, consider this your express ticket to understanding how we might actually colonize Mars. You ready for this? Musk thinks we could have a self-sustaining city up there on Mars. And get this, within our lifetime.
It's why it's so interesting about this. It's not just about planting a flag and saying we made it. Musk is talking about a full-blown civilization, a whole Martian society. That's a whole other level compared to, like the Apollo missions back in the day.
Okay, so let's
Yeah.
break it down. First things first, how do we even get there? Well, that's where Starship comes in. You've heard of Starship, right? But this is not your run-of-the-mill rocket.
You get that right. Starship is designed to be fully reusable. Think about it for a second. What if every time we flew a plane, we had to build a brand new one from scratch? That's basically how space travel has always worked.
Hmm.
Until now, reusability completely changes the game. It cuts down the cost per mission so much that regular trips to Mars, well, they actually become possible.
So is it like a space shuttle, but way cooler and more efficient?
It's even more than a shuttle. Okay, so picture this Starship launches on top of this massive booster called the Super Heavy, and that thing blasts it out of Earth's atmosphere, gives it enough fuel to reach orbit. Then the real magic happens. Starship refuels while it's still in orbit before heading off to Mars.
Hold up, refuels in orbit. Is there some kind of space gas station floating up there?
Not exactly a gas station,
Yeah.
but the idea is pretty similar. And here's where things get super interesting. Starship uses methane-based fuel. Why is that a big deal? Because you know what? We can make methane right there on Mars using resources that are already there.
Whoa, we're talking about making rocket fuel on Mars. That's incredible. We wouldn't have to haul all that heavy fuel from Earth.
You got it. That's what they call in situ resource utilization, or ISRU, if you want to sound like a rocket scientist.
Mm-hmm.
And it's super important for building anything sustainable on Mars. We can't rely on shipments from Earth forever. We have to learn how to live off the land. You know what I mean?
So we've got this game-changing spaceship that can refuel itself on Mars. What's the timeline for all of this? When are we going to see Starship in action?
Well, SpaceX is aiming for orbital tests with that super heavy booster, probably sometime in 2024 and 2025. If those go well, we could see unmanned cargo missions maybe heading to Mars by the late 2020s.
Okay, so picture this late 2020s. We've got a whole fleet of starships loaded up with robots, habitats, all the stuff you need to start building a base. And they are blasting off towards the red planet. It's like the ultimate interplanetary moving day.
Yeah, these unmanned missions are super important for a bunch of reasons. Not only are they going to be delivering all the supplies, but they're also going to be paving the way for human missions by testing out all this crucial tech. Think about it for a sec. Landing a giant spacecraft on Mars that's crazy complicated. The atmosphere is thin, and there are all kinds of hazards. You got to make sure you can land safely and reliably before you send any people.
Yeah, that makes sense. Mars is not exactly a welcoming place. Dust storms that could cover up your solar panels, problems finding enough water ice, the whole keeping humans alive thing in that extreme environment. That's a pretty hostile world, to put it mildly.
Oh, it's definitely a huge challenge. But if we can overcome those hurdles well, we will have learned some serious lessons about living and working in one of the most extreme places in our solar system. That's the kind of knowledge that will be absolutely essential when we start sending people to Mars.
All right, so let's say the robot pioneers have done their job. Landing systems are perfected, habitats are all set up, and we figured out how to make fuel and even some basic supplies right there on Mars. What happens next?
Well, then we get to the main event. The first human missions to Mars.
Cue the dramatic music. This is where it gets really exciting. What are we talking about here? A small team of astronauts. A research station.
We are talking about sending crews of 50 to 100 people per trip. The goal is to set up a permanent base. Think about what it would be like to be one of those first Martian settlers, to step out onto the surface of another planet, knowing that you were part of something truly historic.
I can't even imagine. But where are they going to live? Underground bunkers? Sci-fi domes?
So both are possibilities. Yeah, underground habitats would give you better protection from radiation. That's a big deal on Mars. But inflatable structures would be more flexible if you need to expand. And remember, these habitats aren't just shelters. They need advanced life support systems. And we got to use that ISRU stuff to make the base as self-sustaining as possible.
So they're going to be extracting water from Martian ice, growing food in Martian soil, maybe even breeding Martian air one day. That's next-level frontier living.
It's a bold vision. but it's becoming more and more possible if technology gets better. And once we get that initial base established, the focus shifts to something even bigger, building a real Martian society.
Now we're talking about creating a whole new civilization on a brand new planet. This is starting to feel like we're in a sci-fi movie, but what does that actually look like?
We're talking about developing Martian agriculture, 3D printing for construction, maybe even a Martian economy with trade mining and research.
Hold on, Martian mining, Martian trade. Who are we treating with?
Well, it's too early to say for sure, but the possibilities are out there. Imagine mining rare minerals on Mars, conducting scientific research in a totally new environment, maybe even developing new technologies that are unique to Mars.
So we're not just surviving on Mars, we're building a whole new way of life. It's mind-blowing, but this all takes time, right? We're talking decades, maybe even centuries.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Building a civilization on Mars is a multi-generational project. But every step we take today, like figuring out sustainable tech and learning to live off the land, all of that is setting the stage for the future.
Okay, so we talked about Starship. We talked about building a base and this long-term goal of a Martian society. But there's one piece of this puzzle that we haven't touched on yet, terraforming.
Terraforming, the idea of turning Mars into a more Earth-like planet, that's probably the most ambitious part of Musk's whole vision. It's been in science fiction forever, but could it really happen?
Terraforming sounds like something straight out of a movie. How do you even start to terraform a whole planet? Are we talking giant mirrors reflecting sunlight? Or maybe like a planetary scale greenhouse?
And it might not be as crazy as it sounds. One idea is to release trapped carbon dioxide from the Martian ice caps. That could thicken the atmosphere and warm the planet up.
So we're talking about basically intentionally triggering a greenhouse effect on Mars. Doesn't that seem kind of risky?
It's definitely controversial. And there's a lot we don't know. We have to be really careful about the consequences before we mess around with the Martian environment too much. But the potential payoff is huge. Imagine a Mars with a thicker atmosphere, flowing water, maybe even breathable air. That's the ultimate goal of terraforming.
It's a pretty amazing vision. But let's be real here. Terraforming Mars, if it's even possible, that would take centuries, right?
It's a long-term project for sure, something that would take generations to complete. But the steps we take now, things like developing sustainable technologies and learning how to live off the land, that's all laying the groundwork for that future.
Okay, so let's say we figure out how to get to Mars, build a base, maybe even start this long process of terraforming. What about the people who actually make the trip? What's their life going to be like? It's not exactly a weekend getaway to the Bahamas.
Yeah, that's a question that's both fascinating and really challenging to think about. We're talking 6 to 9 months crammed in a spaceship. And then life on Mars is harsh and unforgiving. It's going to take a special kind of person to do well on Mars.
I was just thinking about that. Imagine being stuck with the same small group of people, cooped up in a spaceship for months on end. You'd have to be super adaptable and resilient, both physically and mentally. It's almost like some kind of extreme reality TV show, but with much higher stakes.
For sure. Picking astronauts for Mars missions is going to be incredibly tough. It won't just be about technical skills. We need people who are emotionally intelligent, great at communication, and able to handle stress and uncertainty. They need to be able to work together as a team, solve problems in creative ways, and stay positive even when things are tough.
So we're not just sending astronauts, we're sending pioneers, people who are willing to leave everything behind and start over on a totally different planet. That's a huge commitment.
It is. And we can't forget about the physical challenges. Months in microgravity, that's going to affect the body even with exercise. Plus, there's radiation exposure, the psychological effects of isolation, and you constantly have to be alert in that dangerous environment. These are all things that we have to figure out how to deal with.
It sounds pretty daunting, but also really exciting. These pioneers would be pushing the boundaries of human experience, testing our limits and paving the way for future generations.
I'm curious, once they land on Mars, what's the first thing they do? It's not like they can just order pizza and unpack their bags. Those first few months on Mars are going to be crucial. Remember those unmanned cargo missions we talked about? They will have delivered the essentials and some pre-built structures. But the first human crews will still have a ton of work to do. Setting up the base, getting the life support systems running, and starting to make the habitat self-sufficient.
It's like showing up at a campsite, but instead of putting up a tent, you are building a Martian colony.
That's a pretty good way to put it. And remember, they're doing all of this while wearing spacesuits.
Yeah.
And dealing with the low gravity. It's going to be really demanding work physically and mentally.
Speaking of spacesuits, can you imagine trying to build a habitat on Mars in one of those old, clunky Apollo suits? They need something way more flexible and comfortable.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. The Mars suits are going to have to be lighter, more mobile, and they need better life support systems. They'll also need more protection from radiation and the Martian dust. Just imagine fine red dust getting into everything. It's a constant problem on Mars.
So they're going to be spending a lot of time in those suits, building, exploring, doing experiments. It's going to be a whole new way of life. But what about their downtime? What are they going to do for fun?
Well, Mars isn't exactly known for its nightlife, but there will be plenty to do. Hiking through Martian canyons, exploring giant lava tubes, maybe even taking a rover out for a spin.
Off-roading on Mars. Sign me up.
And when they are back at the base, they might catch up with family and friends on Earth through video messages, watch movies, read books, maybe even do virtual reality stuff to experience Earth environments.
A little virtual vacation back to Earth to help with the homesickness. I wonder if they will have Martian sports leagues. Low-gravity basketball would be pretty wild.
Yeah, it's fun to think about those kinds of things. But on a more serious note, those early Martian pioneers are going to face some serious psychological challenges. Isolation, confinement, the constant danger. It's going to take a toll. We need to come up with new ways to help people stay mentally healthy in that kind of environment.
That makes sense. They're going to be pioneers in every sense of the word, pushing the boundaries of what humans can handle. But let's shift gears for a minute and talk about the bigger picture. We talked about building a Martian society, but what does that really mean? What would Martian civilization actually be like?
That's a question that really gets the imagination going. If we can actually set up a permanent human presence on Mars, Martian society is probably going to evolve in ways we can't even imagine. But based on what Musk and others have said, we can try to guess what some of the key elements might be.
Okay, let's do a little futuristic thinking then. What are some of the things that would make Martian society unique? So we were in the middle of imagining what this Martian civilization might actually look like.
Right, and one of the things that would really set it apart is that it would have to be built on sustainability from the very beginning. It'd have to be incredibly resourceful,
Yeah.
using local materials and coming up with closed-loop systems for everything. Food production, waste management, the whole shebang.
So a truly circular economy where you're reusing and repurposing everything, that's a pretty big shift from how we do things here on Earth.
Oh yeah, it would have to be. And that kind of resourcefulness would be everywhere. Think about Martian architecture for a second. They might use things like lava tubes for shelter, or 3D print buildings with Martian regolith. Heck, they might even come up with totally new building methods that we haven't even dreamed of.
I'm picturing these super futuristic Martian cities built right into the landscape, powered by the sun and completely self-sufficient. It sounds kind of like a sci-fi utopia. But I'm curious about what daily life would be like for those Martian citizens. What would a typical day look like for someone living on Mars?
Well, they might start their day with some 3D printed protein bars made from Martian algae, or maybe some hydroponically grown veggies. You got to remember, food production on Mars would be super high tech. You'd need controlled environments and innovative ways of doing things to get the most out of your crops.
Martian algae protein bars. Not exactly my idea of a delicious breakfast, but I guess you can't be too picky when you're on another planet. So what happens after breakfast? Do they head off to work? What kinds of jobs would people even have on Mars?
In the beginning, a lot of the work would be about keeping the base running and building new infrastructure. So you'd have engineers, technicians, construction workers. But as the colony grows, you'd start to see a wider variety of jobs. Teachers for the first generation of Martian kids, doctors and nurses to take care of everyone's health, scientists doing research in a completely new environment.
And what about arts and culture? Would you have Martian musicians, artists, and writers?
Absolutely. Imagine Martian artists making sculptures inspired by the planet's geology, or musicians writing symphonies that capture how vast and silent Mars is.
It's wild to think about how Martian culture would develop. Shaped by all the challenges and opportunities of this brand new world, it would be like a total melting pot of ideas. But let's address the elephant in the room for a second. We're talking about sending people to live on a planet that's not exactly friendly to life as we know it. What about all the risks?
Yeah, you're right. Life on Mars would be full of challenges.
Yeah.
Radiation exposure, the mental strain of being isolated and confined, the chance of accidents or equipment breaking down in that harsh environment.
And those are just the things we can think of ahead of time. Who knows what other problems might come up in such a unique and unexplored place?
Exactly. It's a huge undertaking, and there's no guarantee that it will work out. But the payoff could be massive. If we can make it work and establish a human presence on Mars, it would be a giant leap for humanity, not just in terms of technology, but also in how we see ourselves in the universe.
It's a powerful idea, and it really captures the imagination, the idea that we could become a multiplanetary species, able to live beyond Earth. It speaks to human ingenuity and our desire to explore.
And it all starts with that first step, or in this case, that first launch.
Well, we've covered a ton of ground in this deep dive, from the nuts and bolts of Starship to the challenges of setting up a base on Mars, and that incredible vision of a self-sufficient Martian civilization. There's so much more we could talk about, but for now, I encourage you to check out the source material and form your own opinions.
Yeah, there's still so much to learn about Mars.
Yeah.
The possibilities are really endless.
Thanks for joining us on this trip to the Red Planet. Until next time, keep looking up, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.